Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon if you're joining us from somewhere other than Australia. Welcome to today's briefing where we're going to launch our concept of an EdTech Innovation Network. We're talking specifically to educators today. So it's an opportunity. We're going to focus our conversation specifically on what we may be able to do to help you in engaging with the EdTech community in a structured way. But before I kick off, I would like to spend a moment as we gather today physically dispersed but virtually connected. I'd like to reflect on the meaning of place and in doing so acknowledge traditional owners of the unceded lands from which we are conducting today's business. Personally, I'm joining you from the traditional land of the Bunurong Boonwurrung people, the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people of the Eastern Kulin Nations. And Cherie, who's going to be with us in a moment, is going to be joining us from the land of the Bittergal people of the Eora Nation. I extend all our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And especially this week, as we head into the voice referendum on Saturday, I think it's really important that we think about what this concept of Australia means and the role of each participant within it. And it sort of really is a broad thing that I think deeply about. So hopefully, I won't spend too much time thinking about politics, but I do hope that we as a country make some good decisions as this week progresses on. So today we're going to spend a few moments thinking about what we are going to be doing as far as the EdTech Innovation Network is concerned. So I think we're going to have Cherie join us. So maybe Cherie, you will say hello to Cherie first, and then we'll get stuck into some presentation. Hi Cherie, how are you?
Good, thanks David. And hi everyone, thanks for joining this morning. Really appreciate your time and looking forward to not only talking a bit more about the network, but also hearing any questions that you've got as well.
And actually, I was just realising as I was doing that acknowledgement of country, I assumed you're in Sydney, but you actually may have been in Parramatta, or you may have been just outside. You may have to correct me on where you're actually joining us from.
I am joining from the lands of the Darug people. So I previously lived on the lands of the Gadigal people.
Okay. Thanks very much, Cherie. I'm going to launch into our process. And just a reminder, as we go along today, if you've got any questions, please feel free to put them into the Q&A box in Slido, or if you've gone directly to YouTube, you can also put your question there. I'm going to get my slides up and we'll give you a bit of a structure of what we're going to do today. So let's begin by getting all of my stuff set up here correctly. So the EdTech Innovation Network is an idea of how do we build collaboration. So EduGrowth's remit is to build the Australian EdTech ecosystem, and we do that in a number of ways. What we've been doing recently is thinking deeply about how do we connect EdTech companies, education providers, researchers to actually grow this idea, and we've created this scaffolded collaboration framework as a model, and Western Sydney University are joining us as principal partners in that program to begin with. Oh, let me just get to my slides. I've gone off those slides. So there are four key components to the EdTech Innovation Network. There's the EdTech companies, whether they're startups, scale-ups, or established businesses. There's the researchers in education. Now, I know that this is an interesting space across our environment because we could be talking about academics who are traditional researchers, but we can also think about the professional staff within higher education providers as part of that network as well. They're incredibly important to being able to deliver innovation. We want to talk about the education providers, the K-12 schools, the universities, the vocational providers, the workforce, and also the private higher education providers as well. And the educators, the teachers, the academics, and also those professional staff, which are crucial to ensuring that technology is embedded within an environment and actually delivered in a constructed and deliverable model. It's impossible to build out a network without a statement of vision. And our vision is really simple. We want to create an engagement framework for innovative education providers to partner with ambitious EdTech entrepreneurs and world-class education researchers committed to reimagining learning in the digital age through a collective impact program. We see there are lots of components, and we're going to spend time today talking about those components. It's important to note that really what we're proposing here has four components for you to think about. We're going to talk about the structure, which is a bit more complicated. but it borrows from known models that are used around the world and expands upon them. So you've got Digital Promise in the United States, which focuses on the K-12 school space, and you've got the University Innovation Alliance, which is focused on higher ed. And if you don't know either of those organisations, I can recommend that you go and look them up. There's a series of defined actions so that participants can see their role in that collaboration. We want to create an environment of thought leadership, shared understanding, and co-design for solutions. And finally, we want to create a brand halo where all stakeholders are seen as educators, innovators locally, nationally, and internationally. The framework, in really simple terms, has a increasing engagement from startup, scale-up, established companies, education providers, education researchers, and increasing complexity as we go down this table. And we're going to go much more into the detail of that in a moment, but I thought that we would just outline this process and then we'll come back and talk about the framework in a moment. I'm joined by Cherie now, who's going to give us a bit of an understanding as to why Western Sydney University saw the opportunity to partner in this network.
Great, thanks, David. So for those joining that I haven't met yet, my name is Cherie Diaz. I'm the Executive Director of Education Innovation at Western Sydney University. I joined the university in August of last year to head up a 5-year strategic project looking at how do we transform our postgraduate offering. And with that comes acknowledging that the needs of learners, both Australia and abroad, have shifted and will continue to shift. So it's not just about how we create meaningful and impactful curriculum and content, whether that's micro-credentials or programs, but it includes the entire learning experience and the edtech and ecosystem that supports that. So with that context in mind, I always like to start with a view of what is the landscape that we're holding this conversation as part of, or establishing this network within. And in reflecting and preparing for this conversation, I think one of the things in the 20 years that I've been in education, across many different forms, everything from high school teacher to running vocational and higher education colleges and being within an edtech company myself, is that there's always been a pace of change. But the pace is not slowing down for very valid reasons. And if we look at some of the snapshots I've put on the screen, even just in the last month, the number of interim reports and roadmaps and insights, whether that's what's there or even through the Business Council of Australia, as to the forces that are driving that change and the demands, that it's a complex environment and one that we're all dealing with at the same time and sometimes in different order. But realistically, in order to meet the challenges, there's the view that we hold at the university that we can do it internally, and we are doing it internally. But wouldn't it be awesome to be able to do it within a network so that we are able to look at how do we gain more systematic capability to engage in those conversations, to learn from each other, to draw upon insights, and to measure outcomes so that we're able to make informed decisions to guide us on that process. So if we can click over to the next slide, I'll give a bit more context about what we're doing within the university. So as I've mentioned, within the university, we have our established learning and teaching arm, or learning futures, but within the direct team that I look after in the academic division, we also have what's called the EdTech Innovation Hub. So it's a model where our team is working with our educators, education researchers, and EdTech partners to look at how do we deepen the connections, how do we pilot and measure the efficacy of what we're doing so that we're making informed decisions. We're making sure that we're optimizing how we're utilizing the different tools and platforms and systems that are out there, but also how are we deepening those relationships with the partners one-on-one and across partners as well, because it is an ecosystem that we work within. And we're having a huge amount of fun and benefits from that model, but we're passionate about how do we do this on a deeper level within the sector, which drove the conversation that we've had with David and the team at EduGrowth, and the partnership, which for us was a natural next step as to how do we engage on a broader platform. David, back over to you, I think. Or actually, no, there's one more slide, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. Just one sec. I'm trying to manage multiple screens in a slightly different environment.
So before I hand back over to David, I guess what that looks like in practice is in establishing the network, a key thing for both parties in the conversations we've had is that we're all for action and outcomes, and how do we make this as practical as possible for everyone involved. So within that, the network, what we're really looking to establish is a community of action. It's also about how do we set up that steering committee, which will have a chair, which will include education partners, research, and EdTech representatives to reflect the collective nature of the sector that we're working within, and making sure that the systems, processes, and the calendar of events that are stood up are really there to help us not only drive outcomes, but are giving the opportunity to engage in those really important conversations and to tackle those challenges together. I'm conscious one of the questions is, can other sector participants participate in this program, for example, K-12? And you may have noticed that we've specifically called this the Higher Education EdTech Innovation Network. And that's, reflective of all those different segments that David mentioned at the beginning. But there is work from the EduGrowth team to actually establish a K-12 one. David, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I did. So I think I agree with you. Is the answer to the question here is that we are beginning in the higher education or the post-secondary space first, and then we will build into the K-12 school market at some point in 2024. But we've got a very small team that are focused on getting this one stood up, and then we'll go from there. I think the other point around this network as well, Cherie, before we move on, is really this idea that people can dip in and out of the framework as they see necessary, and the pieces that make sense to them. Because some people will want to do certain parts, and some people will only want to participate in, say, for example, having a voice around what innovation looks like, where other people may actually want to get deeply involved in stuff, which is a really nice way to segue into what this framework might actually look like, and ensure that we can sort of unpack some of those components for people as we go. So I've shown this picture already, but let me unpack it a little bit. So at the highest level, we want to bring together an action group. I'm sure there are many of you in this call, as I have been, involved in many working groups over your time. And we made a conscious decision to call it an action group. And that's because we actually want people who want to come along and do something. We don't want people who just want to talk about things. We don't want people who just want to come and have another external 3-hour meeting, and we do it 3 or 4 times a year, and we come up with some interesting things. We actually want to get people who want to do something together, who want to actually get going and actually produce something. I'm just jumping ahead in my slides to make sure that I'm not laboring this point too much before I get another slide a little bit later that tells us. We're then going to have a feedback loop. We know that one of the things that's incredibly important for EdTech companies is to start beginning to build out their products. They want to start matching product market fit. They want to understand whether or not the solution that they're building and delivering is actually what the educators in society and the sector that they're trying to address actually know and work on. So we want to build a voice of educator. We want educators to bring their skills and capability to those EdTech companies through structured one-on-one feedback sessions. We then want to have mentoring for those earlier stage companies, which will come from the EdTech leaders who are part of the action group. We then want to start to be able to do proof of concept, and I'll explain proof of concept and pilot in a little bit more detail in a second. But the most important piece for me is we want to share the outcomes of this at an innovation symposium, so that the things that we produce as a collective group and as a network are actually shared across the wider community. So instead of just having commercial conferences that we go to and summits and trade shows, we actually want to have a place in which EdTech leaders, education leaders and researchers work together to actually collaborate and share their innovation. As an example, across a calendar year, this is what a program might look like. Now, I acknowledge that there are universities and TAFE providers that have different structures, and these academic year starts and ends at different times, and they have trimesters and semesters and all that sort of stuff. As a general comment, we want to have the action group that meets every quarter. We want to have Voice of Educator 2 to 3 times a year. We want to have some mentoring a couple of times a year, and then we want to do a cohort of proof of concept and a cohort of pilot programs. In 2024, we expect to begin proof of concept and pilot programs at some point in the mid-year towards the back end of the year, just because as we build out things. Okay. Let's pull apart some detail within the program, and a reminder, if you want to ask some questions, please feel free to add them into the Q&A box or to add them into YouTube if you're coming directly to there, and they'll end up with us here on the virtual stage. Over to you, Cherie.
Great, thank you. Before I start, one of the questions that's come up is, how does this differ from Coordit? David, do you want to tackle that one, or do you want me to?
You can have a crack at it. I'm happy to. I don't. Yep, go ahead.
Well, I guess there's a couple of pieces here. Is we're not looking to set something up that's completely distanced from the really passionate and experienced groups that are out there, such as Coordit, or Askellite, etc., or ACODE. It's really about how do we leverage, well, I know the reasons that Western Sydney is doing this is how do we leverage the depth of experience and the membership breadth and the understanding of the EdTech sector that EduGrowth brings into this ecosystem, and that voice of the EdTech providers as well to strengthen the model that we're using. It's also about leveraging the experience and frameworks that EduGrowth has built up across a number of different programs in its years in the sector as well. So there's definitely dialogue with the different groups that exist, and looking at how do we extend the output of this within those groups as well. David,
can I add in there as well? And that is, what again, exactly as Cherie said, we would hope to include the associations and the peak bodies that you just mentioned. But one of the things that I'm very conscious of is that the teaching and learning teams within higher education providers are not necessarily connected in. So Coordit tends to have a very strong technology focus. This is very much about the impact on learners or the institution from an efficacy perspective. So it's not necessarily about making sure that there's security and privacy and data security. These are things that are happening within your e-services division or your ICT services. This is a network that involves the teaching and learning people within institutions, those that are focused very much on ensuring that students and the users of education technology are getting the impact from that technology. Did you want to outline the expression of interest a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So we are taking expressions of interest into the development of that action group that will collaboratively work towards the creation of the EdTech Innovation Network. I think it's really key to call out that we're looking to build that group and the network collaboratively rather than saying, here's the model, we're just going to run with this, we've already set all the foundation and the framework, etc. We want it to be a collaborative process so that it reflects the needs and challenges and the output that's required in the sector. So that link there that's up on the screen and will be shared afterwards is open for anyone that's interested to express their interest to be part of it. If we can click over to the next slide, you'll see that there's an outline of what does that look like in practice. So we are looking, as I mentioned earlier, to pull together a group that reflects the different stakeholders that we're talking about in this network or sector, to be able to collectively, over a period of 12 months, to guide and establish what those key priorities in the working model looks like. Starting with a half-day workshop for that kickoff as well. David, did you want to add anything to that one?
Yeah, I think it's really important. It's as the picture I drew before, which has the Triple Helix Plus model of innovation. So we're probably all familiar with Triple Helix, right? Where we've got researchers, we've got typically stakeholders, typically it's funding stakeholders, government or philanthropic or research providers. And then you've got the entrepreneurs who are trying to build out some stuff, which sometimes refer to as commercialization. I think in the EdTech moment, what we're saying is we want to get a range of higher education providers, a range of EdTech companies, the education researchers themselves, and then some sector stakeholders so that we can participate over a period of time and build that shared knowledge and understanding between each entity, between those parties. EduGrowth's byline is connect, collaborate, and accelerate. And we are 100% see the outcomes of building the connection. But by actually giving people a collaborative framework, that's where we see the real impact on the EdTech ecosystem as we go ahead. So I thought I might outline or pull apart 2 or 3 of those sessions. So the expectation of the action group: you become a member, you commit to joining the group, you commit to participating actively, active participation, you participate in producing some stuff. We end up producing some frameworks and white papers and thought leadership pieces that inform the sector generally. And I guess we see it as a voice of the EdTech sector to the wider environment as well, and bringing that together. We then start talking about, say, I'm going to pull apart 3 components. I'm going to pull apart the voice of the educator, the proof of concept, and the pilot project. And I might just do a little introductory piece before I jump into that. So in 2020, I'm trying to think of the time frame. Pandemic has changed my, shattered my time frame a little bit. At the end of I'm going to say 2021. It may have actually been in 2020 we started, but I've forgotten the time frame. A couple of years ago, let's go with that one. A couple of years ago, we received some funding from the Victorian government to produce the Global Victoria EdTech Innovation Alliance. And that program informed deeply what we're doing here. And the objective in that program was to support EdTech companies entering new export markets. So what happened was, we appointed some researchers. That was Monash University and Deakin University. The research teams at HEDI at Monash and Cradle at Deakin. We had Professor Margaret Bim and Michael Henderson and Phil Dawson, who crafted an efficacy framework. EdTech companies received some funding to support them deploy their product with a local partner and also an international partner. That resulted in 8 of the 9 projects received commercial support. Essentially, the education partner ended up purchasing the product commercially. So 8 of the 9 projects did that. It's generated more than $10 million worth of revenue and about $12 million worth of investment in that EdTech companies. So it was highly successful, and we're grateful for the Victorian government support then, and we continue to have a great relationship with them going forward. This model has come out as a commercial framework that we can do without necessarily getting philanthropic funding, but in fact actually get the sector to buy the services they need. So voice of educator, we want to see EdTech companies and educators themselves, and you'll see that sort of equation at the top is going to change a little bit over the next few slides, because it's going to have slightly different actors in it. It'll be a defined process twice a year, typically in March, April, and then September, October, and that will obviously be dependent upon academic scheduling and all the things that are happening at the time within the institutions, and we'll make sure it match. We'll match EdTech companies, educators for feedback on their product. Our expectation is of improved product market fit. There is a lot of research around the world that looks at the amount of capital that's gone into education technology that has not produced a commercial outcome or an impact on the learners. And so we want to make sure that products, that EdTech companies are getting access to people who are using their product to give them feedback on whether or not that product makes sense, and to bring that deep education experience around pedagogy and curriculum and deployment and all of the challenges that you face in your role. We want educators to bring their skills to the EdTech sector. One of my objectives here, and one of EduGrowth's objectives here, is to ensure that the voice of educators are part of the EdTech ecosystem. Sometimes you can get this impression that EdTech companies are producing stuff over here and throwing it across a fence, seeing whether or not somebody wants to buy it. We want to begin building those meaningful connections right up front because we see huge benefits. And including when I talk about educators in the higher education space, I also talk about that third force, that professional staff who sit between academics and the professional teams with a deep insight, the learning designers and the EdTech deployment specialists and project leaders and things like that. A proof of concept will include an education provider. So EduGrowth has built a framework for delivering structured proof of concepts that refine product market fit. Our framework has been deployed again both locally and around the world, and we've tested it in different markets and it works. What you basically end up with is an 8 to 12 week project plan. You agree it between the parties. The agreement includes defined actions and feedback points, and there's an external project manager, almost like a independent arbitrator when we get to a point where someone's not necessarily agreeing that we agreed to do something or we didn't get something done. And the output of it is a case study. We want to see evidence records being built for EdTech companies, and we want to see the educators that are providing that input being recognised for their valuable contribution to that development process. We then get into the pilot project. So now we've got EdTech companies, education providers, educators, and the researchers. And these researchers will act as a critical friend. So I mentioned the Global Victoria EdTech Innovation Alliance. So we've got a framework that was developed by Monash and Deakin, research lead for the EdTech Innovation Alliance. It's a robust framework that allows the measurement of efficacy across different product categories. So I have used this term a couple of times. I might just go back one moment and define efficacy for us because we use this term all the time. So firstly, we're talking about evidence records, not capital R research. We're actually talking about action-based research applied, where we're actually trying to work out whether or not a product is impacting the community that it was designed for. So efficacy definition is important. So efficacy in this context is the impact on the intended audience when the product is deployed as expected with the audience as expected. And it's important that we have that definition because that's the only way that we can measure impact and efficacy. The team of researchers, Mark Bierman, Phil Dawson, and Michael Henderson actually created a framework called PAF, and I'm going to have to remember what that acronym stands for because I can't remember off the top of my head. But it's something like product, implementability, acceptability, and the F was feasibility. So it looked at all of those dimensions to be able to help assess whether or not a product is, has efficacy. Because one of the things that you all know, having deployed products or even new initiatives across your institutions, is that when something doesn't go wrong, which is the feasibility, right? Like, for example, if a product requires an academic to spend 3 hours doing data analysis every day, it's not feasible that it's going to be used. So it's an important component into the framework. Typically, the project plans are 4 to 6 months, and they are agreed between parties. The researcher acts as a critical friend or a research mentor to guide the implementation and act as a critical friend to product and review efficacy. It's incredibly important. One of the byproducts of the EdTech Innovation Alliance that we saw was that researchers bring a unique skill and a fantastic skill that the EdTech sector needs, which is someone who can actually critically analyze the data that you're collecting. One, is it rigorous? Is it sustainable? Is it substantive? Does it make sense? So the data you're collecting, and how are you applying or analyzing efficacy? And I'll share a very brief story. One of the projects that we worked on, there was a group of people working across the project, and I only really got involved in the weeds of the project if it started to appear to come off track. That might be the nice way to put it. And so in that instance, in this particular instance, I met with the CEO of the EdTech company, I met with the research mentor, and I met with the research team. And I pulled together lots of different pieces of data. And one of the things that I observed is that the research mentor actually almost became a default chief product officer for that company, because that research mentor kept asking that EdTech production team and development team and this leadership team, can you measure these 5 different domains? Should you really only be focusing on this one? Do you want to try and say that you impact 30 different audiences, or should it be these 3 or 4 that you can impact? And the outcome of that is that research mentor now is engaged by that EdTech company in an ongoing model, so that they can, or in an ongoing engagement, so they can continue to measure and monitor efficacy as they go along. The end result and the output of this is that we would expect to see case studies and efficacy analysis. And we want the findings to be presented into the EdTech Innovation Network Symposium so that we can all share that information. There was a question in the questions which we'll come back to in a minute, Shireen, we'll talk about it, was what research, what data comes out of the project. But I think that's a valuable point to, let's go back and look at these questions now, because I think we're starting to think about next steps. So I want to go back a moment and look at this, what level of data the partners will get. So it's important to note that there is details of data. So firstly, all of the frameworks, all of the white papers, all of the case studies will be available to the network. To the action group, they'll get a little bit more detail because they'll want to be helping us inform and make this a key component of what they're doing. So we want to make sure that the data and the frameworks that are being produced. But it's very, very important to note that there will be products that have, so for example, student usage data or identifiable data that will not be available to the whole network. That would be contained within the project, and the projects will obviously have to get ethical review to make sure that there's a overarching ethical framework and that it's meeting all of those requirements. But absolute guarantee that the product and the certainly innovations of individual companies will not be shared publicly. Did you want to add anything onto that one, Sheree, before we start taking a bunch of questions here?
Yes. No, I think you've captured the main points, but realistically, one of the objectives is to make it more accessible to look at what are those outputs, what's a systematic and scalable or repeatable framework that we can use that builds more of a common language between the stakeholders in this sector, to also look at, not only how do I deliver a proof of concept or a pilot in-house, but also how do I learn from where it's worked or hasn't worked elsewhere, so that I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel each time. I'm able to make more informed decisions or quicker decisions, as well as here's a like use case that really, when I look at the key needs or outputs I require in a particular context, that I can learn from that or leverage those components in my current organization as well. So data, as we're aware, is important from both a privacy perspective, but also making sure that what is produced and published gives enough detail to be able to make those informed decisions across the network as well.
Fantastic. So let's talk a little bit about next steps, and then I think we've got a bunch of questions you want to ask. So if you're an education provider, what we're looking for is education providers who want to partner in the program over a multi-year process. We have $100,000 for a 3-year commitment. In our initial stage, we're looking for 4 to 6 institutional partners to come and join us. Oh, I've just got a timer going off here, sorry. To come and join us. That could be universities, TAFEs, or a private higher education provider. You'll be identified as an innovation partner within the network. We would ask you to nominate 2 representatives to the action group. We would invite you to participate in the Voice of Educator programs across the year. We'd like you to commit to 2 proof of concepts each calendar year, so that everyone in the network's actually doing something, not just talking about it, and to commit to at least 1 pilot program annually. Though I know that we've had conversations with a number of partners who are wanting to do more than that, but that's sort of our minimum. We want you to showcase your university via the innovation case studies, and we want you to bring lots of people along to the Innovation Symposia and give you 20 complimentary registrations, which if you do some maths, what you pay for registration, that's actually a reasonably cheap model to get into. And then you can obviously nominate the host of the Innovation Symposia. I think I jumped the gun before, Sheree. So firstly, you can email us if you've got any questions, but we do have a bunch of questions in here, and I can't actually put them on screen, but
Oh,
they're
I can
there as well.
ask them for you if you want.
Okay, awesome. Let's go for it. Pick out some questions.
It's awesome. I get to ask all the challenging questions and put David in the hot seat. So I'm very interested in becoming a thought leader in the EdTech space. What opportunities will be offered to help us leverage the voice of educator in this innovation network?
I'm not sure I fully understand the beginning part of the conversation around you want to be a thought leader in the edtech space, because I think that there are lots and lots of people there. So we're awesome to have anyone who wants to participate. The question went off screens. Can we get it back?
Oh, okay. So what opportunities will be offered to help us leverage the voice of educator in this innovation network?
Yeah. So if you're an edtech entrepreneur, I'm going to assume this question is from an edtech entrepreneur. There's definitely a place we will have twice a year where you'll have an opportunity to go and meet with some educators to talk about your product. Hopefully you would use that opportunity to demonstrate your product and obtain feedback on it. Don't think about it as a sales process. Think about it as getting product market fit and ensuring that there is that your product is serving the community that you're trying to engage.
Yeah, I think if I were to tackle that question from an educator or an institutional lens, I think the opportunity offered through this network, and if I talk about a pilot that we've done already this year within the EdTech Innovation Hub, is it gives an opportunity for the educators and the education providers to also demonstrate how they're working in partnership with EdTech providers to tackle particular problems. It gives the opportunity to demonstrate what strategic partnerships look like between the stakeholders, as well as the output. When we talk about efficacy and research, the practical output that comes from doing proof of concepts and pilots that can help to inform how we've addressed a need. And as I mentioned earlier in the conversation, the challenges that we're having, they have nuances within each organization, but they're rarely unique to one organization. It's about how do we draw upon those experiences to build that dialogue. And I think that has a role to play in thought leadership and connection in the network as well.
Awesome.
Next one is, with the voice referendum later this week, how will the EdTech Innovation Network work to incorporate Indigenous voices into the Australian educational landscape?
They're really simple answers. I'm not going to give you a political answer. I don't know is the answer. I don't know how we will tackle that, but it's a valuable question of how do we ensure diversity in the sector? How do we ensure that there's a voice? There's no doubt in my mind that education technology has the capacity to help close the educational divide that we see across lots of different parts of our community, including the Indigenous community. So can I answer that quickly by saying, I don't know, but it's a valuable question. I think the action group and the steering committee can have a conversation about right up front.
Definitely, and I think it's an awesome piece to point out and for us to keep front and center when we actually scope out what that action plan looks like and what are the priorities for proof of concepts, etc.
Awesome.
How do you build and maintain realistic goals for participating in the network?
So I think that we've got a framework of what we think participation should look like. And I think that it's about joining the action group, committing to do some pilots, committing to do some proof of concept, and committing to do some voice of educator sessions. Can I go back a step and share with this group? I joined EduGrowth to lead it in 2018, and EduGrowth was originally founded by Griffith University, Charles Sturt University, Monash, University Deakin, and La Trobe Universities with Navitas. And what was really clear is I in an ideal world, I'd like to be able to go back to 2018 and go, hey, here's a framework, we'll engage people. By having a defined framework, my hope is that within an institution, we can have a conversation with executive leadership and then to get down into the people who are actually going to do some work, the executive directors and the directors who are actually going to do some stuff on the ground, and that framework will help us focus on ensuring we deliver. But this is probably a question for you as well, Sheree, because you're the one who's sitting internally within the university saying, how do you sell it internally?
Yeah, I think the calendar that's built out is one that we've both looked at. You know, how do we make this doable, but still maintains momentum? And it's one where I've had the privilege of being both within the education provider and an edtech company to go, is this doable? So, for example, you know, knowing that most edtech companies work within an annual roadmap, but quarterly review of their product strategy, etc., knowing that we can sync in line with that, as well as what is that commitment we're asking for. But importantly, knowing that it will take time to establish the network and to ramp up. So it's not like we're trying to do everything from day one. That we're really looking at how do we lay the foundation and build momentum as we go.
Fantastic. I reckon that question I just see pop in there feels like it's a question directly for you, Cherie, which is, as an educator, how do you suggest we get, it's just cut off my screen here, how do we get decision makers from an institution on board with this program? Well, that's what you've been doing for the last 12 months. So
Yes.
100% over to you.
So I guess there's a couple of pieces to that. Is one, if you're interested, please fill out the expression of interest so that we can stay connected. There is a pack, an information pack that we can share that you can then disseminate. We will also be running a couple of more sessions. So whether it's you want to connect us with particular people within your organization or to invite them into a further conversation that will be scheduled, we're happy to work with you to support that. As well as if there's any feedback in the deck that's been put together that will help to answer some of those questions, we're happy to take that feedback on board and make sure that the information is as consumable as possible to help with that conversation. I think the key piece here is that being able to call out that it's a collaborative network, it is focused on action, there's output, and it's not just the work within your organization, but what can you learn and draw upon from being part of that network as well. They're key outputs that I know we're really looking forward to drawing upon in the university. Will university colleges be equally as involved as universities proper? Oh, that's an interesting one. So I am going to call out yes. And the reason I'm saying that is I've had the privilege of working across the private, vocational and higher education sector, as well as within the university sector. And we all have a really important role to play in the education ecosystem, and all are invited.
100% agree. 100% agree. The reality is that education is changing at such a fast rate, and I'm absolutely convinced that there are multiple ways that people are going to continue to be skilled, reskill, upskill, change careers, do all sorts of things, and that's going to come from a bunch of different advisors, and certainly university colleges can play. I absolutely agree.
Yeah. One that we've missed, what timing are we working to?
And what if we can't get buy-in straight away? So firstly, we are looking for expression of interest now. We're going to kick off in Q1 2024. It's a evolving network. So I learned a term yesterday, which I'm going to borrow, which is a learning lab. So it's a living lab, I should say. It's going to evolve over time, and it's going to respond to the market. So we're going to continue to add people to the network over time. We're expecting that we will have a range of partners in place by the end of this calendar year, but we expect that there'll be more that'll come in as time goes along. I think we've got most of the questions there. Again, an opportunity for anyone who wants to ask a question. We are doing a repeat session tomorrow for EdTech providers specifically, so that we can answer some of the questions that they've got. And then I think in about a month's time, we're going to do another one of these sessions, just because we envisage a range of questions that we may not be able to answer straight away. So I think that's probably it, but I'm waiting to hear from someone in our production room whether or not that's the case, but I think we're probably getting close to a close.
And whilst we're waiting for that, I just want to say thanks for joining. please reach out if any questions come out after, as you walk away from this session, and look forward to staying connected. Okay, we've got the go-ahead to wrap up, David.
Awesome. Cherie, thank you very much for today, but also for you and the thought leadership of Western Sydney University to jump on board and to become our principal partner in this network and to build it as we go along. Thanks very much.
Likewise. Thanks, David, and I'll see you tomorrow.
See ya.
Thanks. Bye.